Suzanne Behrends qui va venir nous parler aujourd'hui et on la remercie de sa présence aujourd'hui qui compte beaucoup pour nous. Suzanne Behrends-Frank est conservatrice à la Phillips Collection à Washington. C'est une conservatrice qui a fait de nombreuses expositions à la Phillips et dans d'autres lieux depuis plusieurs années. Elle prépare notamment, et c'est la raison de sa présence ici, une exposition qui rejoint nos centres d'intérêt et les raisons pour lesquelles nous sommes réunis aujourd'hui, puisqu'elle prépare pour 2020 une exposition Rediscovering Picasso entre Paris et Barcelone autour de la période bleue. Vous savez que la chambre bleue est conservée à la Phillips Collection et nous sommes très heureux de l'accueillir aujourd'hui. Elle nous parlera des liens de Picasso à Puvis de Chavannes. Cette communication sera en anglais. Thank you very much, Sue, for your presence today. Et nous aurons une courte pause après cette présentation. Merci à vous.
Thank you, and I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for working with me. I'm much more comfortable speaking in English than in French, so I want to thank the curators for inviting me today, but I really want to go and give my congratulations to Monsieur Lebon and to the curators who put this exhibition together. You all have an incredible opportunity here in Paris to see an exhibition that is so ambitious and so well conceived, and a lifetime would not go and give you another opportunity to see all of these works together at once. So congratulations to all of you. And so my talk today is about Puvis de Chavannes and Picasso, and the importance of the work of Puvis to Picasso's Blue and Rose periods. It's a well-established part of the literature on Picasso. Many of the formal and iconographical links between the two artists have been explored. But my talk today really stands squarely on the shoulders of my predecessors, who have been very insightful about the basic rhetoric of Puvis' work that we see reflected in the Blue and Rose periods. And so my intent today is not to be exhaustive or slavishly historical in hewing to a kind of chronological walk through time with Puvis and Picasso, but I'm really looking to use the opportunity of this exhibition here at the Orsay to really kind of give you some key concepts and insights into specific works that you will find in the Orsay galleries and the exhibition. But a few comments first on Puvis, who was a seminal figure at the threshold of modernism in the late 19th century. He died in 1898 at the age of 73, just 2 years before Picasso made his first trip to Paris. His aesthetic style explored a universal language of simplified form and decorative design that created harmonious visual ensembles, and he was much admired as a modern classicist. And his aesthetically diverse and distinctive work was a major influence in the 1880s and 1890s on artists such as Georges Seurat, Paul Gauguin, Vincent van Gogh, Maurice Denis, and many others. But Picasso's awareness of Puvis and his seminal importance to French modernism predates his first trip to Paris in 1900. Because around 1899, when Picasso was still a teenager, he met the painter Santiago Rossinyol in Barcelona. And Rossinyol was the leader of a group of Catalan artists who identified themselves as modernistas. A generation older than Picasso, Rossinyol had lived in Montmartre on and off from 1889 to 1892. And in fact, he was one of the many attendees at the 1895 Paris banquet, honoring the then 70-year-old Puvis at the end of his career. But in Barcelona, Rossinyol's admiration for Puvis was exceeded only by his passion for El Greco. And Rossinyol extolled how Puvis was, and I'm quoting here, the most universal genius of the art of our time. So when Picasso had his first opportunity to see for himself the much praised work of Puvis, it was in the fall of 1900 when, having just turned 19, Picasso traveled to Paris in October to see his own work on exhibit at the Exposition Internationale Universelle. In those few weeks before the exposition closed in November, Picasso spent much of his time visiting the painting section, where he had ample opportunity to see the 4 Puvis paintings on exhibit, including 3 from the 1880s, which I have on the screen. It was on his second visit to Paris in 1901 that Picasso had many more opportunities to study Puvis' work in situ, especially at the Pantheon, the Sorbonne, and the Musée de Luxembourg. Although Picasso's studio at the time was on the Boulevard de Clichy near the Moulin Rouge, his Barcelona friend Jaime Sobartes arrived for a visit in the fall of 1901, and he stayed at a hotel on the left bank near the Sorbonne. Sobartes, who would later become Picasso's secretary, wrote in his memoir how Picasso would often take lunch with him at a Turkish restaurant in the Plaza de la Sorbonne, which gave Picasso easy access to many of Paris's best-known Puvis works, including the 1889 mural in the Sorbonne's Grand Amphitheater. And the importance of this Sorbonne mural to Picasso in these early years has been much remarked on in the literature. And it is further confirmed by a discovery that was published several years ago by Anne Baldessari, where Picasso's personal archive included 4 postcards of the Sorbonne mural, and which are reproduced at the bottom of the slide. Sobartes remembers that he accompanied Picasso to the Musée de Luxembourg in late 1901, where they would have seen Puvis' 1881 painting of the Poor Fisherman, as well as the final painted sketch for the second cycle of Saint Geneviève murals at the Pantheon, the Saint Geneviève provisioning Paris under siege from famine. In fact, since the hotel that Sobartes was staying at in late 1901 was not far from the Pantheon, Picasso had easy access to Puvis' 2 major mural cycles on the life of Saint Geneviève, the patron saint of Paris. The earlier one you see here dates from 1874 to 77 and is on the childhood of Saint Geneviève and is accompanied by this singular panel, individual panel on the right of Saint Geneviève as a child in prayer. And then the later Pantheon mural cycle that was Puvis' last campaign in the 1890s, Saint Geneviève provisioning Paris under siege from famine, with this separate panel on the right depicting Saint Geneviève keeping watch over the sleeping Paris. Painted 20 years apart, the later cycle from the 1890s was actually finished not long before Picasso arrived in Paris for the first time. In his memoir, Picasso, An Intimate Portrait, Sobartes tells us that as he watched the Blue Period evolve in the late fall and winter of 1901-02, he wrote a now lost article that discussed Picasso's new work and how it focused on the relationship between color and sentiment, and Picasso's increased emphasis on stylized gesture and pose, ideas that we understand today draw inspiration from Puvis' work. Sobartes recalls specifically the painting that you see on the screen, Seated Woman with a Shawl, which Sobartes described as follows: representing a woman seated in a prison cell, crouched beneath the caress of the pale light which comes to visit her, further chilling her shrunken shoulders. The seated woman wearing a shawl shows a stylistic and conceptual change in Picasso's depictions of the women of Saint-Lazare prison that began in the winter of 1901-02. Puvis is in great part a catalyst for this change. In fall 1901, Picasso had done numerous paintings of prostitutes and their children cast in the mold of religious Madonna and child imagery, such as the image you see on the left, which is a work from the Metropolitan Museum of Art titled Mother and Child by a Fountain. Now, however, Picasso focuses on a monumental single figure depicted in profile, lost in her thoughts, isolated within a claustrophobic, geometrically constructed space. Puvis' emotionally powerful composition of Sainte Geneviève watching over a sleeping Paris, a mural installed at the Pantheon just 2 years before Picasso's first trip to Paris, provides a seminal clue to Picasso's changing aesthetic and the manner in which he began to reformulate his presentation of the Saint-Lazare prostitutes and the downtrodden in general. Puvis' composition shows a contemplative Sainte Geneviève placed within a carefully constructed exterior space that effectively reduces the picture space to the plane of the wall itself. Landscape and architecture complement each other here in this composition that is verticals and horizontals that relies on these very crisp geometric shapes to form the terrace, the pavement, and the wall of the architecture, while the play of moonlight casts diagonal shadows on that architectural wall. Picasso responded to the austerity, the cubistic architecture, and the subtle tonal variants that give the scene a modern feeling in this Puvis composition. In his Seated Woman with Shawl, Picasso takes note of Puvis' emphasis on night imagery and the geometric framing of a single figure in profile. Certainly, Picasso understood the context of Puvis' mural as celebrating civic pride, national patriotism, and religious virtues. He doesn't imitate Puvis, however. Instead, Picasso takes from Puvis what will elevate his own work to a new level, and thereby preserves the interplay between the sacred and the profane that he had already begun to explore in his Saint-Lazare Madonnas. As scholars have noted, Picasso often undermines and contradicts the meaning behind Puvis' imagery, an historical shift away from the civic and the religious to an emphasis on social modernity. The saintly Sainte Geneviève, looking out across Paris under the moonlight, becomes the melancholy prostitute of Saint-Lazare, trapped in her prison cell at night, illuminated by the cold moonlight. She is a massive figure lost in her thoughts, a sinner in the eyes of both the state and the church. In addition, Picasso's palette not only borrows the blue tones of Puvis' Sainte Geneviève mural, but she also adopts the older artist's aesthetic style of sharply delineated figures that are physically and psychologically isolated, as one can see in Puvis' The Poor Fisherman. The thwarted narrative, evident in the Puvis' Poor Fisherman, was also intriguing to Picasso, and he found new ways to experiment with that idea. In his Barcelona Blue period, the sea becomes a recurrent motif and backdrop for his newest works. Puvis' reductive horizontal bands of blue-toned land, sea, and sky in the Sainte Geneviève, watching over a sleeping Paris, are important to Picasso's new manner of incorporating the sea and solitude into the 1902 and 1903 Barcelona works, as we see in this early 1902 painting titled Crouching Woman Wearing a Hood. It shows a woman curled upon herself, reduced to interlocking shapes, crouching on the ground in the corner of a structure with an empty expanse of sea suggested just beyond the ledge on which a simple clay pot rests. And you can't help but wonder if the vase with flowers that's in the Puvis mural was somehow, manifested itself as this simple clay pot. When Picasso returned to Barcelona in early 1902, he took with him the theme of the mother and child that he had been exploring in Paris as secular Madonna imagery, which you see on the screen here in the upper center of the mother and child by the fountain, and transformed it into women with children on the seashore, sometimes accompanied by fishermen. As Picasso's biographer John Richardson reminds us, Picasso grew up in several Spanish seaports, and in Barcelona, he prowled the area adjacent to the city's wharf, seeking out homeless subjects. Picasso's 1902 painting on the right here, called The Fisherman's Farewell, and a related drawing that you see in the bottom center, dates from January 1903. They both relate closely to Puvis' heroic canvas of 1887 titled The Fisherman's Family, which Picasso would have seen at the Universal Exposition in 1900. In both Picasso's painting and drawing, the mother and child are posed similarly to his early Saint-Lazare prostitute Madonnas, painted in Paris. But in 1902-03, Picasso's Barcelona work has the sea as its backdrop. The sea is outside of time and place, and a backdrop for a series of romantically destitute mothers and children wandering silently on the beach. Puvis is an essential ingredient in this stylistic and conceptual shift that emphasizes the simplification of place with an emphasis on pose. In works such as the 1902 Barcelona picture Mother and Child by the Sea on the far right, you can see this simple division of the composition into flat bands and the use of the boat, which recalls Puvis' 1881 canvas, The Poor Fisherman, that you see on the center. We can see that the profile pose of the robed mother in Picasso's picture with this swaddled baby tight against her chest is related in many ways to the profile figure in the far left composition of the draped Sainte Geneviève that is in the central panel of the Pantheon mural where she is bringing provisions to the starving Paris. While the pose of Picasso's mother and her enveloping drapery are suggestive of a religious overlay, the figure is clearly a fallen woman, as she not only wears the white head covering of Saint-Lazar's syphilitic prostitutes, but she also carries a red flower in a manner directly related to a 1900 poster advertising a cure for syphilis that was designed by the Catalan artist Ramon Casas. Picasso borrows from Puvis, but the youthful Spaniard transgresses the meaning of Puvis' pictures by mixing the sacred and the profane. Similarly, the backdrop of the sea and the boat in The Mother and Child seem to be Picasso's Blue Period counterpart to Puvis' vague and unspecific landscapes, but they can also easily be understood by Picasso's contemporaries particularly as the outskirts of the seaport of Barcelona itself, a place where one would find the outcast from contemporary urban life. Puvis' work provides the template for Picasso to refine his own themes on social misery. In mid-October 1902, Picasso returned to Paris for 3 months, a trip likely related to a third exhibition of his work that year at the Gallery Bert Weil, held November 15 to December 15. Picasso had no funds when he arrived in Paris on this trip. Although he made contact with the Catalan artists in Paris, he did not stay in Montmartre with them. Rather, he chose to stay first with Catalan acquaintances in Montparnasse, then at a hotel near the Sorbonne on the Rue Champollion, with yet another move to the Hotel de Maroc on the Rue de Seine. Ultimately, Picasso reached out to his friend Max Jacob, who offered to share with Picasso his small room on the Boulevard Voltaire. Without a permanent studio in which to work, Picasso spent his days drawing and studying works at the Louvre and the Musée de Luxembourg, as well as studying Puvis' murals at the Pantheon, the Sorbonne, and the Hôtel de Ville. We know Picasso's enthusiasm for Puvis during these months from the drawings he made, and also from Max Jacob's later description that the iron bed in their shared room was, and I'm quoting, covered with drawings that recalled those of Puvis. Puvis' classically inspired allegories were primarily in the form of large-scale public murals intended to convey civic and patriotic ideas on a grand scale, and also to invoke this timeless pre-industrial past, a golden age, if you will. Picasso, too, had an interest in the theme of the golden age, and he found Puvis to be a valuable guide. In the drawing, you see Picasso's imagined idyllic golden age. The drawing shows a mother holding a child and a man carrying a lamb. They are at one with nature in a pastoral landscape where sheep graze and men labor. Scholars have connected this drawing with Puvis' Pantheon mural of Sainte Geneviève praying that invokes a similar Arcadia through a familiar relationship that is tied in a landscape setting that is timeless. Similarly, Picasso brought to Paris at this time, that winter of 1902-03, an interest in themes related to the poor and the hungry in the modern world. He found in Puvis' murals at the Pantheon and at the Hôtel de Ville Similar subject matter that was rendered in Puvis' distinct abbreviated style with minimal narrative detail, although couched within Puvis' symbolist framework that was wrapped up in historical myth, patriotism, and religious virtue. In the ceiling of the grand staircase of the Hôtel de Ville, which you see here on the upper right, Picasso would have seen Puvis' allegory of charity in one of the four vaults intended to promote Parisian virtues. Charity in this context promotes giving to the poor as a humanitarian deed and a civic virtue. Picasso may have also seen the esquisse for this ceiling mural that Puvis gave to the city in 1894, a detail of which you see on the bottom right. This esquisse was ultimately deposited at the Musée du Petit Palais after it was created in 1901. In Puvis' allegory, charity is administered to the poor by a secularized angel of mercy, a caped Madonna-style figure who reaches outward to the woman with two children. She does not offer food, but rather she offers the embrace of compassion. Picasso's drawing that you see on the upper left screen dates from this same trip to Paris. In it, you see two sketches that relate conceptually to Puvis' mural, showing a nursing mother on the ground begging with her extended free arm, and in the upper corner, a similar scene, but now with a man offering bread or some other sustenance. Another drawing on the bottom left screen develops the idea more completely by Picasso. Puvis' Angel of Mercy is always conceived as a woman, but Picasso turns this Angel of Mercy into a bearded man in contemporary dress, offering sustenance to a destitute mother huddled on the ground, cradling her nursing infant. In January 1903, Picasso copied the left-hand scene from Puvis' mural in the Pantheon of Saint Geneviève feeding the starving Parisians. In this vignette from the mural that you see on the right, an old woman has collapsed from hunger and is helped by a young woman and a man. In Picasso's drawing of this particular vignette, he wrote on the top, De Puvis en el Pantheon el quadro de la hambre, which is from Puvis in the Pantheon, a picture of famine. Picasso continued to explore the theme of famine, hunger, and assistance in other drawings related to the Pantheon murals, including examples on this slide, one which shows the collapsed woman on the far left with a single figure assisting, and the other one that shows on the top center shows the collapsed woman from a different angle, but one assisting figure, and now we've added, Picasso has a standing figure holding a bowl or some other object. Picasso transforms the motif again into a series of two drawings, one of which a figure holds a bowl here on the far right, and then one in the center bottom where a woman holds a bowl with two children, a boy and a girl, who stand silently with outstretched arms towards the bowl. Upon his return to Barcelona in early 1903, Picasso finalized his own statement on the theme of charity, famine, and hunger in this small canvas that is titled La Soupe. Painted in deep blues, it is conceived as a bas-relief or a frieze in the manner of Puvis, who similarly generalizes place and simplification of form. But you see Puvis' example of the frieze that was, he had two friezes above the Saint Geneviève murals at the Pantheon. And the slide reproduces a separate painting that he did of the saints of France that are above the mural cycle of the childhood of Saint Geneviève. In La Soupe, Picasso has transformed the exchange of sustenance, represented here by a bowl of steaming soup, into a ritualized act of charity between an impoverished woman and a child that is both timeless and noble. Picasso's permanent move to Paris in April 1904 not only put him in close proximity once again with Puvis' murals and easel paintings, but in the fall of 1904, he had the opportunity to fully immerse himself in the work of Puvis at the Salon d'Automne at the Grand Palais from October 15 to November 15. 43 Puvis works were on view that included paintings, pastels, drawings, and caricatures, and some of the works were really quite large in scale. So this is 6 years after Puvis' death, and Puvis was considered important enough to be given a major retrospective at the Salon d'Automne in company with Cézanne, Redon, Lautrec, and Renoir. Such a high-profile presentation can only have encouraged Picasso to look even more closely at Puvis' work than he had in the previous 2 years. As the literature clearly notes, the 1904 retrospective at the Salon d'Automne not only reinforced Picasso's previous knowledge of Puvis, but crystallized Puvis' influence on Picasso in his works from mid-1905 to mid-1906. A key Picasso work from early 1905 that heralds this change in the Spaniard's style is the watercolor on the screen left, titled Circus Family, or Acrobat's Family. The entire spirit of this work is pervaded by the influence of Puvis and evident in its subtle, delicate terracotta pink, pale blue, and chalky white color scheme, in the poses of the figures and the simplified bands of the background. The composition is idyllic. This is another version of the Golden Age. The poses of this marks a turn in Picasso's own work towards a more Arcadian vision that embraces the serene and the ideal, and the qualities that Picasso finds in Puvis, especially works on view in the Salon d'Automne. For example, on the upper right, you see Puvis' pastoral vision of men and women at one with nature in a painting, a large painting called Summer. Picasso's Circus Family, like this Puvis painting, shows mostly women engaged in domestic chores, such as gathering firewood, washing dishes, and looking after children. Picasso's figures are arrayed in a frieze-like manner across the composition, again, very much like Puvis' work, especially in this fragment of the family from the Ludus Pro Patria series that you see in the middle screen. The two babies at bottom left in Picasso's watercolor are a direct quotation from The Poor Fisherman. And the lyrical curves of the trees in the watercolor, which reflect the pose of the young acrobat balancing on the ball, are similar to the way that Puvis would use landscape elements as a counterpoint to images in his own works. And a very dramatic example is in that center image of the family fragment. The main dynamic of the Circus Family, however, is the child being trained by a harlequin to do a balancing act on a ball. Ultimately, Picasso incorporated this motif as the sole focus of a major composition painted on the back of an earlier work. In Young Acrobat on a Ball, Picasso substitutes the immobile strong man sitting on a box for the harlequin. In the large finished painting, the seated figure of the strong man is seen from the back and visually plays against the dancing figure of the girl poised on a ball. This combination can be traced directly to Puvis' 1896 painting, Dramatic Poetry, which Picasso saw at the 1904 Salon. Puvis' painting, which is now in the Behrends collection, is actually a reduced version of a full-size mural he did for the Boston Public Library. In it, Aeschylus is the seated figure here from the back. And in the middle ground, you see these two dancing Oceanides with their arms raised above their heads, and their poses combined in Picasso's work to create this lithe young female athlete on the ball. The art historical literature also connects Picasso's strong man, seen from the back, with the male figure in the Pantheon mural of Saint Genevieve in Prayer, where the contrast between the strength and delicacy of the foreground figure to the middle ground in the Puvis, which also has oxen in the background, served as a model for Picasso. When examples of the early Saltimbanque works were exhibited in February 1905 at the Galerie Saugerillet, Picasso's changing palette was noted by the critics. Apollinaire wrote that Picasso's, I'm going to quote, color has the flat quality of frescoes and the lines are firm. One can see the change distinctly in the Acrobat on a Ball from a few months later. This painting is essentially a large black and white drawing tinted with wash. As noted in the literature, Acrobat on a Ball is an exercise in contrast with the geometric blocking of the man and the lissom figure of the balancing girl brought into harmony through very subtle distortions of scale and pattern. The broad geometric shapes of these two figures and the background setting against which they are placed are closely interrelated in order to achieve this kind of gentle monumentality that you see of the ensemble that really speaks to the corollary one finds in Puvis. Long recognized is the manner in which Picasso's shift away from the monochromatic canvases of the blue period turns to a softer palette of pale whites, blues, grays, tans, and pinks in 1905, again derived from Puvis. On the screen, you see two 1905 works, Acrobat on a Ball on the left and Girl with Basket of Flowers on the right. Scholars have connected Puvis' changing palette to works by Puvis that he saw at the Salon d'Automne. Particularly what you see in the center of the screen is one of the panels, the left cartoon of 3 for the frieze of the Saints of France that is in the Pantheon that Puvis did in 1877. The 3 cartoons together created an enormous display on the wall that was 2 by 5.5 meters. They are monumental in conception and broadly painted in the extremely pale, opaque, blanched colors that we associate with Puvis' mature aesthetic. Indeed, the fresco-like surface and scale of both Young Acrobat on a Ball and Girl with Basket of Flowers owe much to Puvis' example, as do many other works from the years 1905 and 1906. Picasso's monumental Girl with a Basket of Flowers directly recalls Puvis' nude version of Hope that was exhibited at the 1904 Salon d'Automne. The boldness of Puvis' pose cannot have escaped Picasso's notice. Puvis' personification features a nude pubescent girl sitting outdoors on a white fabric spread out on a small hill. In her extended left hand, she holds a budding twig to signify renewal. Thin and wan, Hope's pictorial body is arranged to face the viewer as she gazes directly out at us, lacking in self-consciousness. So although Puvis had also painted a larger clothed version of Hope, it is this smaller nude version that was exhibited in 1904, and it was often copied, notably by Gauguin, who quoted it directly in a 1901 still life. Picasso, however, does not make a direct quotation, but he creates a response to Puvis. Picasso's model, according to John Richardson, is a teenage girl from the Place du Tertre in Montmartre who is named Linda the Flower Seller. She sold not only her body, but also roses outside the Moulin Rouge. Picasso's adolescent prostitute is depicted in an undefined space in a static, hieratic profile pose that is very similar to Puvis' saints in a processional frieze. Examples of which that I show you the cartoon and then a detail from the frieze above Saint Geneviève saving Paris. Picasso's young woman holds a basket of flowers from the bottom as if it were a ritual object. The red flowers may symbolize her lost virginity, and like the necklace and the ribbon in her hair, the basket with flowers emphasizes her nudity and the manner in which she knowingly markets herself to the male gaze. Indeed, her face is turned directly toward the viewer with a world-weary look. Even the palette Picasso uses recalls the cartoons of Puvis' Saint Geneviève frieze. Picasso clearly has taken on the challenge of Puvis' allegorical personification and transformed the underlying prurient aspect of Puvis' nude pubescent girl into a monumental image of a contemporary teenage prostitute. Picasso continues to adapt the paintings of Puvis into his work of 1906. Both La Coiffure on the left and La Toilette on the far right are recognized as related to Puvis' 1883 painting that you see in the center called La Toilette. That painting by Puvis had been exhibited not only at the Universal Exposition in 1900, but again in the 1904 Salon d'Automne. As Gary Tintereau has remarked, the dusty palette and pyramidal composition of La Coiffure point clearly to Puvis in the painting on the left. In both Picasso's La Coiffure and his version of La Toilette, there is a very distinct fresco-like quality to the color that connects them to Puvis. In La Coiffure, Picasso has once again subverted Puvis' model by turning the woman's body and face away from our gaze. In La Toilette, the scale and poses of the two figures follow from Puvis' cartoons for the Saint Genevieve murals, in which the older artist's simplification and flat modeling had immense effect on Picasso. So let me say in conclusion that my talk just grazes the surface of the influence of Puvis on Picasso. As scholars have remarked again and again, Picasso's engagement in artistic quotation from the master artists of the generation before him, as well as the old masters, is evident from the outset of his career, as is his simultaneous determination to avoid direct imitation by distance his work in some manner from the original. Picasso's approach has always been to borrow, digest, and transform. As the literature reminds us, a seminal part of Picasso's creative process has always involved a constant reformulation of his artistic language. In Puvis, Picasso found an artist with a modern aesthetic that fed the young Spaniard's own inclinations towards large-scale figural canvases and paintings with complex content. One need look no further than the monumental canvas, The Family of Saltimbanques, from 1905 at the National Gallery of Art in Washington. It is over life size at something as 2 by 2.5 meters. It is a wall-sized canvas that aspires to the grand scale of Puvis' murals in the Pantheon. The isolation and stillness of the figures, their frieze-like arrangement, and their placement within this dark, dusty landscape is completely in the spirit of Puvis, as is the chalky rose-blue palette and the elusive nature of the narrative that binds these figures together. It is arguably Picasso's most important painting of his early career, aside from the Blue Period masterwork La Vie, and it encapsulates everything Picasso learned from the French master Pierre Puvis de Chavannes. Thank you.